All right.
What's up?
What is up? Everyone is consuming more and more digital content because everyone is stuck at home due to the virus.
How bad is it?
How is New York? Is it severe out there, or?
People are concerned, but people are still going about their day. Not a lot of people are wearing masks on the subways. I chose to, but not a lot of people are doing that. Still, what's that?
Yeah. Oh no, sorry, it was the audio.
Oh, okay. But yeah, it's a little scary because you got this hotbed in New Rochelle that's not too far away from the city. You got people commuting into Grand Central and Penn Station, and it is spreading. I think on Friday there were 77 cases. Today they reported 140 cases.
Wow.
So that's a pretty quick increase. That one person out of New Rochelle that was sick spread it to like over 30 people confirmed.
Jesus.
Just one person. So it is scary. People are stocking up. There was an article on CNBC this morning that came out saying, hey, if you're over 60, you should consider working from home or staying home and stocking up your groceries and things like that. Thank God for things like Instacart and DoorDash. It might be a good time for onboarding a bunch of folks that wouldn't necessarily be the target demographic for a lot of these companies, right? But something like this.
But unfortunately, these are the workers that we expect to be hit the most too, right?
Well, I think a lot of these workers could take precautions, right? In some cases, I know in China, some people were just asking the delivery folks to just leave the stuff outside, right? So just ring the doorbell, leave it outside the door, and take off, right? And so that way there's no human interaction, and it limits your chances of exposure. So that's one way that you could probably minimize exposure. But yeah, I mean, some of the elderly, these aren't digital native folks that are downloading Instacart and DoorDash and having food and groceries delivered to them. But, this is an opportunity to kind of help a lot of these folks out.
Really crazy.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Sorry, we probably went on a little tangent there for you.
Yeah.
But this is the raise. And if this is your first time tuning in, we'll give you a little bit of an intro. The raise has been an interactive series being done in real time on how to raise money for your business. It's not a workshop. It's not a seminar. It's actually the behind the scenes look at the research, decisions, and the actions that I'm taking while raising money for my next company, Fanbase. So what we hope is that by giving you a little peek or sneak preview of behind the scenes of what goes on, decisions, that maybe you can find some help in those in the process, understand it a bit better, and then hopefully follow along on your own path.
Yeah. And, during the course of the series, I've been spending time with Greg, acting as the VC and angel investor, kind of giving some insights into how an investor might be thinking about various aspects of raising money for Fanbase. I will provide some insights as best as I can and answer questions that both Greg and you, the audience, have about fundraising and kind of what might be going on in the head of an investor. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please ask your questions in the comment section, or if you go to foundercraft.com/raise, you can ask your questions there. We'd be happy to answer them on a subsequent episode. So, Greg, let's jump into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this episode, we're going to be talking about, I think a lot of folks who've been following along, or ideally are likely reaching sort of the point where they've worked on their presentation, they've done their research, they've maybe started to consider who the right people, or maybe prioritize who the right people are. They've got maybe a prototype or made some progress on their product, their market, or their understandings. And, what today we wanted to chat about was really who you should go to and how you should reach out, because there are a number of sort of different circles or spheres of people that may be relevant to this process for you. And I think we'll talk about a variety of those folks throughout the course of the next 20, 30 minutes. The first group that I personally went to, and I'll start there just to tie this back to, I guess, our actual circumstance. In the first bit of outreach that we did, it was actually very, very informal. So I did not do sort of a concerted, execution-oriented sort of effort around like, hey, I'm raising money, and trying to create urgency in a window around which that should happen. The first bit of people that I was able or fortunate enough to work with or chat with were actually like largely other founders or people that I've known for a long time. And the benefit of doing that, there's a number of benefits, I would say, to that group of people in particular, that I want to make sure that everyone is aware of and has thought about. Number one, a lot of them have been through the process. And so they have a great deal of empathy for our side of the conversation in terms of what it takes, what you need to do, how you need to be ready. And they can probably be a good barometer for you about your own readiness at any point in time. Another valuable aspect of sort of working or talking or pitching other co-founders potentially is that a lot of them are not necessarily from inside of your space. And so what they can provide you is sort of that, they can act a lot more like a venture person may, I think, in that they are astute in business. They understand the mechanics of sort of markets, but also likely are potentially somewhat fairly arm's length, maybe to your space itself. And so that external perspective can tell you basically if you have your head up your ass or not. If you're too much in the weeds in what you're doing. And by the way, I did get one of those ass kickings by a good friend of mine, and it was actually super helpful. To try to defend what I was saying to someone who just wasn't getting it, right? Because they were from a different space. So it was actually very beneficial, I think, in the long term. The other main thing, though, I think, probably two factors there. One is if you are fortunate enough to know founders who have been successful and had exits, a lot of them get into sort of speculating with some of their own angel investments. They may not be big amounts of money, maybe small amounts of money, but a lot of them do get involved in varying ways. Some too, because they view it as a financial vehicle, like a way to actually potentially make money. P.S. Most angels should not think that. Some of them, I believe, like want to support their friends, and some of them want to support the startup community at large. So I think like they potentially could be an initial early set of funders for your business as you're looking out. But I would say the bigger and broader sort of value of sort of finding co-founders or former founders to potentially talk to is, and this is a well-known trope, I think, is that you want those warm introductions to investors who maybe from people that they have invested in. And so as you start to think about the investors or VCs or angels or funds that may be that you think are the right fit for you, being able to talk to those founders gives you two things, right? It gives you one, an understanding of their point of view, if your sensibility is right. You know, like companies can say we do B2B, but there's a very deep breadth to like what B2B means, and they may have like an actual focus or a niche. And though while you are B2B, that does not mean that you fall within the wheelhouse that they actually maybe are a good fit for, right? The second part is that if you do qualify or fit within sort of the wheelhouse, they can be that warm introduction to someone, right, inside of that organization. Now, in my case, for example, I haven't pulled any of those strings yet, but what I can say, what I have found is sometimes you will think about it's important to remember that when you look at a VC firm, there's a number of layers of people, and every startup doesn't have access to every partner, right? And so you may think this person is the right person for you to talk to, but the founder that you're working with may be only engaged with a different person, right? And so maybe Pankaj can speak to this a little bit, but I don't. It's not easy for a founder who works with one partner to just, they can't really make the rec go to the person you think is the right fit. Like, so the reality is that you sort of still end up having to tailor it through how you're going to enter through the person they know.
Yeah,
that becomes a layer that I think most people don't think about.
Yeah, and at different firms, you have different dynamics also, right? Like you might have at a smaller firm, you might have one person who handles a particular sector. And, that's not the person that you want to necessarily connect with. You want to connect with somebody else, but, still, that's the person who does those deals, right? And if you want to get a deal done, you have to go through that person. Then in other firms where you have multiple people looking at deals in a particular vertical, there might be some competition, right? It's like, well, I don't want to share the deal with somebody else. I want to get the deal done. I want my name on the deal, right? So, there's that to think about also. So having some sort of understanding about the internal dynamics makes a lot of sense. And it's not always easy to know how that works. But sometimes, if you talk to other founders, you can get that information. And, we've talked about this in the past. I've talked about it extensively. Talk to other founders and get information from other founders, right? When you reach out to other founders, they're going to be willing to share information with you that they wouldn't necessarily share in public. They can give you information that and insights that you wouldn't be able to find anywhere else because they've gone through the process, they've dealt with the folks, they've seen how things have moved around within a firm, right? So, reaching out to other founders and building a relationship with them and finding the right people to share insights with you is important. And it's really part of that research part that we talked about earlier on. So, that's really important that you get to the right person who can actually get the deal done, right? You may like somebody else better. You may have an existing relationship with somebody else, but that may not be the right person to get the deal done.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the founders, they're probably the most accessible group of people, but they will also be busy. So I think you just got to be respectful and mindful of that. Another group that I find interesting, and I think is not talked about enough, is finding the squeaky wheels. And what I mean by that is there are a number of people like Pankaj, for example, who do make themselves available, right? Like through media, through live streams, through tweets, etc. And for example, one of the calls I had, investor calls I had, was because I replied to a friend of mine's tweet, right? And so I think the folks who are putting out advice sort of are giving you the template of what they look for. And in doing that, and if you're listening carefully and you're an astute follower, you should have an understanding of, one, like what they're looking for, how they frame the world, how they see the world, how they judge an opportunity, but also you sort of have a means of engaging, right? Yeah. And I feel like, there's a saying in networking, or I often tell people maybe I'm the only one who says it. The worst time to create a network is when you need it, right? You can't turn that on, right? But if you're a constant engager, part of that community, interacting with other people, being helpful, asking good questions, etc., that gets you noticed, right? And that notice is very valuable, I think, in the long term, right? If after 2-3 months, again, this process likely starts for you months and months before you actually go out to raise money. But if you're out there following people's tweets, retweeting them, asking questions or pointing other people at those pieces, that's the kind of stuff that gets you on the radar,
Yeah.
like with the stranger, like there may be no actual other method for you to connect to that person. And that's
Yeah, and
okay.
I'll give you an example. This is way back 2012 when I first joined 500 Startups. About a month after I joined, we were out in Mumbai, and we had some free time, so we just put out a tweet that, hey, any founders who want to meet up, just come by the Taj Hotel. We'll be here. Come hang out.
Yeah.
And 2 people showed up. Right. And
But then they get like an hour and a half, 2 hours to hang out with you, right? Like,
yeah. And, hung out for a little while. And, neither of them had a startup at that time. They were just following me on Twitter. They said, hey, yeah, sure, we'll come by. And I want to say it was probably a year and a half later, one of them decided to start a company. And, he reached out to me. He's like, hey, I'm starting this up, and this is what I'm going to do, blah, 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 blah. I'd love to come by and talk to you. I was like, yeah, sure, come on by. Of course, we'd still been in touch after that initial meeting, and it was mostly through Twitter. It wasn't like we were hanging out, we were buds or anything like that. But I was now aware of him, and kind of seeing him on Twitter on a regular basis. And when the time came, I said, yeah, sure. I think what you're doing sounds interesting. Let's take you into the accelerator. And we did. And, we invested money in the company, quite a bit of money. So, yeah, he was playing the long game, right? He started building that relationship with me about a year and a half before he actually decided that he's going to start something and wanted to pitch me, right? So, that helped him significantly, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think related to both of those 2 groups, like the founders and the investors who are out there, I have a number of friends. I'm sure I know you have a number of friends. Like, you'll see people say, like, I have open office hours, or like,
I do too.
Talk to me, right?
So
yeah.
I put that on Twitter like a couple of weeks ago. I was like, hey, I'm going to do office hours on Saturday mornings, from 10 to 12 in Flushing. Anybody who wants to come by, holler. One person hollered, and he came. I met up with him on Saturday.
It's awesome. And that's my point, right? I think there are places or opportunities maybe that you're not taking advantage of, right? Like, and some of that is because you're not looking hard enough, right? Like, if you knew that Pankaj was the right kind of potential investor for you, you should be following him. You should be keeping track of if he's offering or volunteering something like that, right? So I think, like, that there is that layer, or there is some open accessibility that does around some things. The next chunk of people that I would say is there is a trend, or an increasing trend in some VCs that I've seen. I forgot the names escape me right now, but where they have like an open process for connecting to them. So some of them like say, hey, like, you can put your deck into like this form, and we promise we'll look at it. Some of them say, you don't need to know someone here, like, just email us, and they offer an email on their website. I think they tend to be smaller, but that's probably good if you're earlier in the game. And so I haven't seen a listing of these, honestly, but I know they exist, and you should consider if those, if there are some of those opportunities or places where you should be or could be reaching out to as well.
So, I'm not going to disagree with what you're saying, but I want to offer a little bit of a suggestion. Do your research, because with some
totally,
they have a here's our email address, or here's an online form, but it kind of goes into a big black hole of some analyst sitting somewhere trying to review all these things, and or in some cases just capturing data of who's doing what, and start tracking companies like 2 years before they may actually think about investing. So you want to do some research to know, like, hey, is this something that I'm likely to have a conversation with this investor for, right? Like, if I submit this form, how likely am I to actually get an email back and say, hey, we'd love to chat, right? And the thing that most founders don't realize is that investors get inundated as soon as you put yourself out there, whether you're a VC firm or you're a active angel investor. You will get inundated with pitches, right? And they come at you from all channels.
I get inundated with pitches. I'm not even an investor. Like.
Exactly. So I mean, that's my point. It's like sometimes it's just practical, right? And there's been a number of threads on Twitter over this topic, like, hey, you should respond to every single pitch you get. And then it's like, well, sometimes it's just not practical. Like investing in startups is not a full-time job for some people. It's like, well, I can't respond to every pitch that I get because that's not my job. I try to, but I can't. So like, I get pitches constantly, and I tell people, like, look, I have a form on my website, just fill out the pitch. If it is a fit, I will respond to you. Sometimes if it's not a fit, if I have some free time, I will still respond, and I still may have a conversation with you, but I'll be honest with you and tell you up front, like, hey, I'm likely not to invest in your company because it's just not a fit for me. But it's amazing. As soon as I tell people, hey, just fill out this form, everything drops off a cliff, right? So it's like, hey, it's going to take you 2 to 3 minutes to do, but founders don't want to spend the time doing that, right? So now it's a great filter for me, because then I say, all right, now I just have fewer things to actually go through and review. And the ones that are coming in, I know are serious.
Yeah, no, totally. And without a doubt, you should research. I wouldn't like go around just dropping my stuff off in random places.
Yeah.
I would think, like, hopefully or ideally you see them invest in a company you know of. You do see some velocity, or they have some investments done or made at this point. So without a doubt, I would say.
And look those people up on Crunchbase and AngelList.
Absolutely.
Try to do some due diligence that way.
But I do think, and because I've talked to so many founders who don't have sort of any connectivity. I tell you about this pathway because you may feel like you have none, and so there are ways, right?
Yeah.
And they may not be optimal, and they likely, as much of this process, lead to nothing, right? But if you feel like you've got nowhere to start, like, that could be a place.
It's going to be a grind, no matter how you look at it, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be a grind. Some people will have some advantages, like they'll have some relationships already. Other folks won't necessarily have a relationship. So, you know what? That's when I suggest to some founders, is like, look, why don't you apply to an accelerator, right? Okay. Sorry for stealing your thunder.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You do it.
Apply to an accelerator, either in your city or a well-known accelerator like a YC, a Techstars, a 500 Startups, whatever. Right. But that's a great way for you to get some credibility relatively quickly if you get accepted, and also get immediate access to a network. Right. So if you don't get accepted to one accelerator, try again, maybe, or ask the accelerator, well, what was missing in our application? And why didn't we get accepted? What's that?
I said, good luck with that too.
Well, yeah, you're right. And, I will say this, there are some accelerators.
Some of them are, all the big ones are, if you think VCs are inundated, like, trust me, like, they are even more so.
Look, at 500, we used to get like thousands of accelerator applications plus thousands of pitches each per year. But, the accelerator pitches that came in, we did make a concerted effort to respond to folks that didn't get in with why did they not get in, and should they consider applying again in the future, right? So not all of the people reviewing applications did that, but we did make a concerted effort. There were conversations about, hey, we should do this every single time we reject not just an accelerator application, but even a seed investment, right? So I think investors are trying to be a little bit more forthcoming in why they decide not to invest in a company, but sometimes it's just practicality, right? You just have too many of them to go through, and you don't have enough people.
And I'm not blaming them. I want to make sure we set the expectation.
Yeah.
Most likely, very detailed responses are likely are not going to be forthcoming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You might get a sentence or two if you're lucky. But that might be your in to start building a relationship with the person who sent you that rejection, right? So that in itself could be an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think related to this idea, though, is, again, I think the theme of all of this is research and relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so what you really should do, so for example, I've been in EIR at WeWork, and whether or not you like WeWork or not, like, that's your thing, right? Like, I'm not saying you should go there. But what I am saying is the connectivity of being in a place where someone else, like, there's a pre-built network of people, mentorship, where there's a pre-built network of, like, just sort of, like, for example, we have our lab manager, and that guy's like always looking out for the people in the lab, right? Yeah. And then that person is a better lightning rod of things, opportunities that may be beneficial to you than you will be by yourself, right? Sure. And so it could be that being in a WeWork environment, or any of the hundreds of other kinds of places like that, can open you to other opportunities because they bring in speakers, et cetera. And so you get a more personalized thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I know investors that work out of co-working spaces, and they get a lot of their deal flow just by sitting in that co-working space. Mm-hmm. Right? It's normal. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of early stage investors, especially when they're not a very large fund, or they're you might have one partner that's kind of remote from the mothership, they prefer to work in a co-working space.
Yeah. So again, find ways to garner new relationships, right? Or like having the system work for you, right? Register your business with, if you're a minority, there's a lot of opportunities. If you're a female founder, there's a lot of opportunities. There's so many places that, and it's a common problem. I don't know why this problem is actually still so unsolved. But the reality is that there are like just the other, like, wasn't it 2 weeks ago you were looking for female founders again, like for something, like you're doing something. And it requires so much effort still, but like aren't good listings. So we have to be proactive as the founders to put ourselves out there.
Absolutely.
Like whenever someone's opening a door, like honestly, you got to take it, right? Like, I don't care about.
And funny you mentioned this because I did find a couple of female founders, and one of them I was organizing a FinTech panel here in New York, and I was looking for a couple of female founders to put on it, and I spoke to one, and she said she'll think about it and get back to me. I said, look, the audience is going to be a mix of founders and hopefully a number of angel investors and hopefully some early stage VCs here in New York. And she said, all right, let me think about it and I'll get back to you in a couple of days. I said, well, could you let me know by tonight? Because if you can't do it, then I'm going to have to look for somebody else. So she came back to me and she said, well, it sounds great, but I'm going to pass. And I was surprised because I was like, well, as a first-time founder, very early stage, and who is planning to raise money soon, she opted not to be on this panel. And like you were saying, it's an opportunity, right? Like you have an opportunity to connect to the local community here. She just moved to New York a couple of months ago. So it's an opportunity to meet with other entrepreneurs and potentially some investors, but she decided not to. So I asked her, I said, I'm just curious, why did you decide not to participate on the panel? And I haven't gotten a response yet, but to me, that was a lost opportunity for her, right?
Yeah,
totally. And to, at least from my perspective, it seemed like, well, this was kind of a no-brainer for her because she just moved to New York. She's about to raise money for her fintech company. And she's at the stage where she could use some additional people in her network. Okay, fair enough. She doesn't want to do it. Maybe she's just not comfortable doing it or something. But it's something that is an opportunity that you do want to take advantage of.
Yeah, look, and I want to be careful. I'm not saying every opportunity is one you should jump on, but
Yeah.
like there are always any number of reasons why people can't do something, right? But I do find, unfortunately, too often us trying to find people. I know, like us, like people involved in the community, we're always looking for people. And I think like when you're the kind of person who responds, people go back to you because you're helpful, right? Yeah. And that makes you the lightning rod for more and more opportunities that may be beneficial to you as well.
Yeah.
So I would say, to the extent you can do it, do it. Because I think it will help you in the long run.
Yeah. I agree.
The other thing, we've said accelerators, we've said, some potential other investors, et cetera. What's left, I guess, after that? There is the cold approach, which is probably a last resort.
Yeah. I mean, I think the cold approach is, and it's something that we've discussed in the past. I think it's a very difficult way of finding access, partly because of the volume that most investors have to deal with, and partly because there's no social proof attached. So it's tough. And the thing that I know a lot of investors do look at is when they do get a cold email or something, one of the first things they'll do is go on to LinkedIn to look that person up. And, if they find that there's, one or two connections or something, then, it raises even more eyebrows. It's like, okay, well, there's somebody that you could have potentially gotten an introduction from and you didn't. Why? So that could also be a negative signal. I won't say don't do it. I would say leave it as a last resort. If there's no other way, if you can't find anybody to introduce you, if you can't connect with somebody on Twitter and build a relationship within an open forum, try to meet them in person at an event and just say, hey, I'd like to just introduce myself. Don't pitch them at an event, but just introduce yourself. And try to find some other way of saying, hey, I'd love to chat. If nothing else works, look, you're not going to lose anything by dropping them an email with your teaser deck. Go ahead and do it, but don't expect a response. If you get one, that's fantastic, but don't expect one.
Yeah, totally. And I think I'll just double click on that. I think all of the things you can do to avoid it being cold, the better, right? Like, if you know they're going to speak at a thing, just try to show up, right? If you can reply to something they've written, do it, right? Like, just, you don't know where they're reading. Like, if someone mentions them in an article, right? Like leave a comment, right? Like, you don't know the breadth of places that they may see you. And certainly if you manage this process like a salesperson, this is account-based selling, right? So you are selling to a very finite number of people. You should know everything you can about those people. You should be trying to figure out how to optimize a pathway to have a meaningful engagement with them, right? And so I think all of those things, you should apply in the process,
for sure,
of getting through this. So I think that's a fairly robust set of people to reach out to and how to do it. I wanted to spend some time as we get to the end, just to do an update on where fan base is.
Yeah, please.
As well. So some changes. I think we've decided to not fundraise, just to pause the effort for a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I think we've built a product. We've used it in a limited number of cases. We've had some good exposure to some early customers. But I think like the process has given us a lot of insight on both fronts. I think like in talking to our investors or potential investors, I really appreciate and benefited from them putting the screws on more precisely like go to market. And it caused us to focus and think through a lot more things with more detail than I think we had in the past, right? On the second part or second side of that, and I guess here's the thing. I think what it did was it changed our go-to-market more so than it invalidated the one that we were doing, right? Because I think we were focusing on more of a BD-oriented integration style approach. At least from the early people we chatted with, they kind of wanted us to get on the treadmill like ASAP. And that plan was not one we really focused heavily on because like we were planning on a very different approach. And I can see the merits in both approaches, by the way. So, and I think that's part of why no one's told us like, hey, we're not interested. Like, I don't think there's been pushback like, you're not ready yet. I think we want to be more ready is probably the way to phrase it, right? So it's less like you're too early for investment and more, I think we should be more ready for investment. And to me, what that means is being better prepared to answer some of these questions about go-to-market by going and testing and validating some of the pathways that surfaced in this process. And so I can go back with more data. And that's sort of always been, the thing in my gut that I've been trying to rapidly improve throughout this process was to improve the data that we had about what we were making. And we haven't been able to improve it enough, I think, in my book, like in the last 60 days. And so I want to like, instead of diverting my time on trying to further like go out, fundraise, and then trying to also backfill this data, I'd rather go out armed with that data.
Makes sense.
So it's not like we're ending the process, and I'm not even like, I'm being upfront with the people we've been talking to, like that's where we are. Like, so if you want to wait, okay, like we can wait. If you're still interested and you're like, good, I trust you guys to do it, great. I'm happy to do that too. But I'm also being upfront that that's what I feel is what we need to reconcile more so now. Now, relative to the process, we didn't really engage the process yet. I think
because most of the people you spoke to were just, people that you already knew.
It was very low hanging fruit, like almost accidental fruit, right? Like I wasn't really trying to pitch anyone yet.
Right.
And I think that hesitancy is because I knew in my heart, like I needed to prove more of this stuff out.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to waste anyone's time, I think, in the process of like, I'm going to go like, but then everyone's going to sort of want to see more anyway. It's the nature of the beast. And so I'd rather have more to do that. Now, I think in the process, the other great learning we got was lots of our early talks, like asked us to consider the users further. And as we did more and more, sorry.
Meaning what? Like consider the user?
So I think we had a pretty clear definition of like who our user was going to be. Yeah. And interestingly enough, we knew both sides we knew we had multiple kinds of users. And in talking to investors, they didn't necessarily, from the conversation that I had, they didn't all agree like which was the best one either. Okay. And again, it's a thing where I feel like we need more data to know, because like there's sort of this fundamental premise when you raise money about what you're going to go do. Yeah. And most folks don't want it to be too open-ended, I guess is the way I would describe it, right? Like, they don't want like 9 options on the table. They want like 1.25 options on the table, right?
Like uncertainty. I mean, just look in the public markets right now, right? Uncertainty about anything rattles investors, right? And I know a lot of people like to think that, people that are angel investors or early stage VCs are supposed to be taking risks. Yeah, that's partially true, but you have to look at it from a risk adjusted basis.
It's a risk because most companies fail, but the idea still has to be sound, right?
Yes, the idea has to be sound, and the plan has to be reasonable, right? It can't be like, well, we'll try this. If this doesn't work, we'll try that. If that doesn't work, we got this other thing that we could do. It's like, whoa. You guys are all over the map, right? Like you said, you want to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Here's the data that tells us that this is what we're going to do. But if it really doesn't work, we've got this other thing. We've got some data behind us telling that that's something that could work as well, right? Then it's like, okay, you guys have done your homework. There's not a lot of uncertainty there. There's some, of course, there'll always be uncertainty, but relatively speaking, there's a clearer path of where you're going to go. And of course, look, once you get into it as an investor, once you get into a company and you see that things change, right? And it's like, well, look, we have to adapt to where the market is taking us, and can we still be successful in making those changes as quickly as possible and responding to what the market says. But getting that check, you want to eliminate as much uncertainty about the team and the process as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I want, like I said, I think this is more about, I think, us wanting to be more prepared than it is about a rejection of the premise of what we're doing. I feel like everyone was like, we love this idea, but there were too many pokey heads coming out of it. Like, well, which one is the right one? And, I've taken a position, as a pragmatist, that I don't know the answer to that yet.
So Greg, let me turn this on its head for a second here. Perhaps you're not talking to the right investors, right? By talking to some of these VCs,
possible.
You're talking to some VCs that are friends, and they may be looking for certain proof points that are further along in a business cycle, right? Whereas if you're talking to some pre-seed companies or some angel investors, and you're trying to raise a smaller amount of money, could that possibly work? Now, agreed. We know that you haven't gone out and actually said, hey, I'm going to fundraise and reaching out to a bunch of people and, running it like a sales process or anything like that. You reach out to a couple of folks and said, hey, I'd like your feedback. And they're like, whoa, let's talk about putting some money in. So it's a completely different thing, but this is more of a theoretical question. It's like, well, is that something that you've considered and saying, well, maybe I should just, fundraise, but raise a smaller amount of money from some pre-seed folks and some angels that I know.
Yeah. And so I should be clear. We're not taking ourselves off the table, I guess.
Right.
And so even in the process of going through this, one of our investors did ask, give me a lightweight scenario, a middle case, and a high end scenario. Yeah. And so we sort of modeled, even our deck, I think now goes from like $500,000 to $1 million as a range now, right? Okay. As opposed to this is the number.
Yeah.
We still have a couple of very close things potentially open. So I guess what I mean is I'm not planning to expand it beyond sort of the people we're talking to. Okay. And if those folks aren't in, the effort and the energy is really still about getting more data to back up and to fuel our plan for the next 90, 100 days,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And from what I've seen, and, I want people to realize this is going to happen probably to all of you in one way or another, right?
Yeah.
It may be if you're lucky, you're in market, you've got a lot of stuff going on and you have a whole bunch of traction. And even with that traction, people will second guess it. Some people will be like, well, this was from your friends, your relationships, it's not scalable. We don't know if it's real, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As a founder, I think you do your self-help by being prepared, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this process almost snuck up on me faster than I thought I was going to be doing it.
Yeah.
And which is great. I think it's been good. I've learned a lot. I think like we know a lot more about we've gotten a lot more focus about what we want to do. And so we have like a plan that we're working towards for the next 60 days.
Okay.
Both in testing the market side so that we can better speak to like, this is the market we're going to go after. And also in learning about the things that were challenging for our users. And so fixing some of those problems at the same time. And so I think that's overall a net win. And waiting another month or two is probably not a big deal for us.
Yeah.
I think at the same time, we are going to apply to YC hopefully, we'll see if we can get an interview for the next batch.
Yeah.
And I think, like taking the same advice we were just giving, right? Like the being inside the program, I think has massive benefits just in terms of focusing you. It creates this competitive environment in your head, even though you're not physically sitting next to people. And I feel like the previous time that we've applied, we weren't nearly as far as we are today, right? And so hopefully there's a little bit more momentum working for us as we come into this process now. And if it doesn't work out, like it doesn't matter to me, like that's what you accept that, right? Like,
yeah.
That's just how it goes. We're still building. Like even if we got an interview to YC, even if we got into YC, it wouldn't be till the fall. And we're building now. Like we're like live testing with users, increasing like our user base all the time. So like those things are all moving well regardless. But I do feel like that could be a good opportunity. And I think it also helps later in the process, if we decide to raise a bigger round or something like that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But it also increases our appetite for finding revenue, like in the shorter term, right? And so, personally, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But
especially with everything else going on right now.
Yeah. Like if we could figure out a way to be sustainable on our own with the market and the economy and all the other things that are changing, it's probably better off if we can do that anyway. But I will warn you now, revenue can be, a double-edged sword, right? Like it can either prove how good you are or how bad you are. So be careful.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Well, I think generally speaking, I think a lot of things are going to look very different if things don't stabilize soon. Right. I'm sure everyone has seen the Medium blog post by Sequoia last week.
Yeah.
Right. So things. When I first saw it, I saw it on I think it was Thursday night. It was like RIP 2.0. But I think a lot of founders are just not prepared for that. And, I won't blame the founders in a lot of cases, especially funded founders, because, most investors have been telling them just like, grow. Here's your growth plan. And now it's like, whoa, slow down on the growth. Let's, batten down the hatches and get prepared for a fairly rough ride for the next couple of months, if not longer. But, I think the approach that you are talking about in terms of, finding sustainability outside of investors, it makes a lot of sense for companies that are at your stage, that are really early. There are, growth is not something you can just like turn on right now, right? There's a lot of things to be figured out first, right? And if you can find revenue from customers to fund figuring those things out, I think you're better off than 90% of the other funded companies, early stage funded companies that are out there, because you've gotten too used to money being in the bank, and now suddenly it's taking longer. You may still raise money, it just may take a little bit longer. And I think a lot of companies are going to have a tough time making that adjustment, just like they did in 2008, 2009.
But as we know, as the saying goes, the best companies tend to come out of those times anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Because you figured it out.
Often for that reason, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if anyone has questions, as per usual, we always welcome them. Just drop them in the comments. I know we're getting towards time, but that's sort of the update where we are. We have a couple more episodes left. This sort of leads into a little bit about what happens if you don't raise, which I think was our last episode. So maybe we predicted this.
Where we scrapped out one.
Yeah. But hopefully I'll close the loop on whatever conversations I'm having by then also, and we'll talk about it by then. Like I said, I think this is the process. This is how it goes, right? Like I could equally have just put my head down and gone out and continue trying to raise. Like I have many layers of people to go through still, or try to reach out to. I just don't feel ready to do that yet. And makes sense. I want to get ready because you want to be able to be in that room and confident.
Yeah. And, coupled with you not feeling ready, I think, with everything that is going on, with the Sequoia post coming out last week, that's also going to change investors' perspectives, at least some investors' perspectives on, what they want to invest in, how quickly they want to invest, how much they want to invest, right? So it's not just a decision that you need to make, but it's a decision you need to make taking into account kind of macro conditions that are not really in your control. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny that you brought up some of these things because I recorded my episode of InvestStream talking about, what are some of the risks involved in investing in startups and why do people get into angel investing? So, kind of a good segue into those episodes coming out later this week and next week.
We'll throw a link up when it gets there.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's I think all we have for this episode. We will be back. I think we have one or two left before we wrap the series. And if you have questions or things you'd like us to answer, we may throw in a Q&A one or something like that just to sort of field questions. You can leave them on wherever you're watching it, just leave a comment and
we'll find it.
Of course, you can also email us at raise@foundercraft. So thank you for tuning in today or whenever you're watching this. And we look forward to seeing you soon. And we'll be back with some more content not too long.
Thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.